Hello and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. Now, my guest today is Andrew McConnell. He is the founder and CEO of Rented.com, which is a company that helps owners of rental properties manage those properties. That's pretty cool. We're going to talk about that today, how we came up with that and how we became an entrepreneur. We're also going to talk about his new book, Get Out of My Head, which is creating modern clarity with Stoic wisdom. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, he found himself completely overwhelmed by all of the things that he had to do, thinking that if he worked for himself, he'd work for himself. And it turns out that he was working for everybody. He had confusion, he had burnout, he had exhaustion, and he had to figure it out. And this book tracks both his path along with the path of so many others. There are stories from athletes, from entrepreneurs, from anyone you can possibly imagine. We're going to talk about all of that today. His background includes working as a consultant at McKinsey and as a director for solutions design at Axiom Global. So he has been in big corporations. He's run his own thing. He was also on Team USA as a swimmer. So we're also going to talk about that kind of mindset. Lots of things to discuss today. Andrew, welcome to Big Talk.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here, Laura.
So I want to go straight into actually the middle of the book. You tell a story about when you were at McKinsey and you were just crushing it. You were working 24 hours a day, all night, all day, and you had a conversation with your mentor at Waffle House. And you talk a little bit about how you basically laid out on the table how you were just completely overwhelmed, exhausted, staring burnout in the face, and you thought you were going to get some like help through this problem, some structure, some ideas from framework. And he was like, yeah, that's how it is. That's how it is for all of us. And he talked about how McKinsey was a place for overachievers, but insecure overachievers. And I want to talk a little bit about that because at the very beginning of the pandemic, I basically stopped sleeping. I was one of those people who was an overachiever, and I was going and I was going and I was going. And then I stopped sleeping, and I had this moment where I didn't know who I was anymore. So I sought out some help from a therapist, and he said, yeah, you're an overachiever. We can work on that. And I was like, well, no, that's a feature, not a bug. And he was like, yeah, but how's your stress level? I'm like, no, it's fine. He goes, but you're here.
Right.
Checkmates, right? And he said something to me that basically stopped me in my tracks. He said, Laura, you don't have to give the trophies back. And I was like, oh, okay. That's something we're going to spend some time unpacking. So you found yourself as an insecure overachiever surrounded by insecure overachievers. What did you do in that moment?
It really made me realize that, wherever you went, there you were. Right?
Yes.
So it didn't matter where you were the one there. And that, yes, I was working so hard. And I mean, look, that insecurity carries in so many different aspects. But,
Yes.
We can even talk about it in publishing, going traditional versus not, of like, hey, I need that validation. But it made me rethink that, hey, just running away from this, is that going to solve the problem?
Right, because you're just going to be you somewhere else.
Right. And I think that was the point Russell was really trying to get at, was all these people think once they get out of here, life's going to be so different, right? And they go somewhere else and their life's the exact same because they're the same person. They changed the scenery, but they're the same person. And until you can go and address that root, right? Like the overachiever mindset and mentality, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're technically doing, because you're going to still end up in the same place personally.
I spent most of yesterday texting with Jonathan Fields, author and podcaster, Good Life Project. And we were having exactly this conversation where we were saying that like, we actually love making things. We love creating. We love achieving. But it becomes, you do all the things that you're supposed to do. You eat right, you exercise, you meditate, you practice good sleep hygiene. And at the end of the day, you are still you are still this personality type who's sort of stuck in this place. And so your book talks a lot about, it's literally called Get Out of My Head, right? And it's about how do we how do we take ownership back over the most important asset that we have, our mind? But yet we're still like, how do you fight that DNA? You were raised to be an achiever. You were, a competitive athlete. You were at the top of your game. You went to the best schools. You went to the best firm. Like so there's nature, right? Who you are, it just in your chemical makeup, and then there's nurture, all of the things that you were given accolades for and found identity in. So how do we get to that place where we can say, it's all right if I don't do everything all the time for all the people?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are two big things there. So one, I think people are getting more and more acquainted with material items aren't going to
Yes.
magically make us happy, right? You study lottery winners, what they're like 12, 24 months later. And you think, oh, if I made twice as much, if I made 4 times as much, whatever it is, that's going to solve everything. But with hedonistic adaptation, we just go back to our base level.
Right, but we're constantly shown through social media, through TV, through friends, like you're just one purchase away, you're one diet plan away, you're one whatever the thing is away from I'll be happy when.
Right. And I mean, there are very specific reasons we evolved for that. If we didn't constantly have that craving, we wouldn't go out and hunt. We wouldn't go do the things that we needed to do to stay alive and pass on our genes. So that was the thing to, hey, keep you wanting. Don't ever get satisfied. Keep you wanting. And so I think we've done a lot of studies, I haven't done it, but a lot of psychologists, sociologists have done studies on material side. But they say, hey, experiences will have this lasting impact. But experiences shared with other people versus achievement and accolades. Accolades and achievement are no different than material items. You get that sugar high, right?
Mm-hmm.
You hit that list or you hit that revenue milestone. And guess what? Tomorrow's the same. Next week's kind of the same as the week before. That nothing really, really changed. And I think that to me is the first step of realizing the accolades, whatever you're chasing is no different than chasing the new car, right?
Right.
Hey, once I get this car, it's going to be great. 2 weeks later, you see the new model and you want the new car. Like that,
Right.
It doesn't change. You just get to one summit and you see the one further on. The other piece of kind of getting out of your head, once you realize that, is there's this phrase of sometimes I fight with my inner demons, the other times I snuggle with them. And
yes.
You can try to fight, but back to it is natural that we're going to have that craving. It is natural that at first we're going to want that thing, and just say, okay, that's okay. I can recognize that, but I also don't have to now passively give my mind and my mindset over to that craving. I can notice and say, hey, I know what you're doing, brain. I know why you're doing it, but I'm going to now go to my conscious mind and say, that's not actually something I want to go pursue. I don't think that's going to bring me fulfillment and peace. I'm going to take a different route. And so it's like you were talking about diet, exercise, everything else. It's not like, hey, I went and fixed this week, so I'm good for the rest of my life. No, your brain is what it is. So it's going to keep doing it. And it's just noticing and getting better at noticing it to take that step back and decide, do I want to go that way or do I want to go a different direction?
One of the things that I've struggled with myself for years, and I'm 51, and I feel like I'm just figuring out this thing now, is what you were talking about, just noticing it, right? Because I think a lot of times we say, like, I'm overweight, I can't stop eating these cookies until I, buy a whole bunch of kale, or I can't leave this job until I find the next one, or I can't, I'm not going to divorce my spouse until I, figure out where I'm going. And so we spend a lot of time in the unhappy because we're waiting to find the thing that's going to make us happy before we make that leap. And that space of just saying, I can actually stop sitting on the couch all night, every night, eating ice cream without having a 10-point plan of how I'm going to, get a 6-pack abs, right? Like there's that space in between of I don't like what's happening now, but I don't know where to go. And it's okay if I just sit in the discomfort for a while. So your book leans on the ancient thinking and writing of the Stoics. And I want to learn a little bit about how you got into the writing of the Stoics in the first place. But I think one of the things about the Stoics is that, well, they're stoic, right? Like they are okay in the discomfort. They're okay in the noticing how you feel about the thing, and then going, well, that's interesting. Why do I feel that way? Let me sit in this discomfort for a while. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how you got into the writings of the Stoics in the first place, and then how that helped you to be in that space of, I'm just going to notice the feelings before I
Yeah.
can move forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, even maybe a precedent step to all that is Stoic people hear and they think stony faced, unemotional, you're not happy, you're not sad, you don't have anything. And that is lowercase s, Stoic, right? That's kind of the pejorative term that we now call it. That is Stoic. But that is different than being a capital S Stoic or Stoicism, the philosophy. And that's where, ancient Rome, Greece, the people who were developing it and coming up with it, it really was much more about noticing and recognizing what's in your control and what's not. And at the very basis element, the only thing in your control is your mindset. You can't control your body. You age, you get sick. A virus can get you. You can be a Russian billionaire and have all your physical possessions taken away. Like anything we think we own, we don't really own. The one thing that we own from birth is our mind. And so, but they also recognize, wait, but all the time we're not acting like owners. We're giving it to other people. So that's kind of the background on Stoicism. But how I got into it, it's kind of a winding path. It's hard to pinpoint, oh, this was the moment that I was in this bookstore and picked up this copy. I do believe it was Tim Ferriss on his podcast had Ryan Holiday, but also in Tools of Titans and some of the others, he has people's favorite books, and Marcus Aurelius's Meditations popped up a bunch there as well. So I think it was an accumulation of hitting from a bunch of places. And then a friend said, hey, you really should read Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It's absolutely amazing. And then that takes you to Ego is the Enemy and Stillness is the Key and all this stuff that Ryan does. And so it just kind of all came together like that. And then I guess the third piece on the Stoics noticing this is they weren't necessarily great at it, right? Because our biology is working against us. The most famous Stoic text is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And that's his personal journal. That's, like we have our journaling practice we write in the morning. So this is the Emperor of Rome that he had his journaling practice that somebody preserved when he died. And it's basically him telling himself over and over, hey, remember this because you're slipping, right? Because the default is to go the other direction. And so he has to remind himself, hey, today you're going to get upset. Today, there are going to be people that are going to really bother you. And you need to decide, are you going to let them bother you or not? Because people are going to be people. They're going to say mean things. They're going to do stupid things. But that doesn't mean you have to get mad about it. You decide. And so that's a lot of the book is just him reminding himself, how can I now take back ownership of my mind? Because my default is going to be to operate in this totally different way.
So one of the things, you talk in your book about lessons that we can all take from it. And one of them is embracing criticism. So you mentioned that, right? Like people are going to be people, right? So how do we, and there's also a chapter in your book about that we shouldn't waste crises, right? Crisis is a terrible thing to waste. They're learning opportunities. They're opportunities to pivot, to change, to see things we haven't been able to see before. And I'm not necessarily saying that criticism and crises are the same thing, but they are both times where they can be identity shifting, identity shaking, right? Like is what that person's saying real about me? Is this crisis something that's showing me part of myself? They say it doesn't change you, it reveals you, right? So how do we get better at this? Your book has just come out. Wall Street Journal bestseller. Congratulations. Incredible. I'm sure you've also probably gotten a 1-star review or two on Amazon. I can tell you that I've gotten hundreds of 4- and 5-star reviews on Amazon, and I can't remember what any of them say, but I can recite for you word for word the 2 1-star reviews that I've gotten.
Yeah. I mean, so on the criticism side, or the crisis, right? Back to the natural reaction is our hackles are going to go up, right? It feels like a personal attack. It feels when someone says something. And it's back to that recognizing. I would say, okay, but this is coming from somewhere. It may not be coming from a kind place, but it's coming from something that they're noticing that maybe I can be better in my doing. So what is that kernel of truth that regardless of their intent, they may be trying to help me, they may be trying to hurt me. It doesn't really matter. I don't need to determine that. All that's true is that they just said these words, or they just wrote these words. What can I, almost selfishly, now take from that to be better going forward? And it's similar to crises, right? Like you talk about, it reveals you. And you think about the situations people are in, right? Like Zelensky was kind of a joke. He was this comedian that fell
Literally,
in.
right? He was literally a joke, right?
Literally a comedian and actor. And then the worst thing that could happen happens. And now he is the leader for the world. I mean, everybody, you are the front line of democracy, everything. And you just didn't know what he was capable of until we didn't know. But I bet he didn't really know either, right? The Socrates said, who would Hercules have been without the Hydra, without Cerberus? What would that guy have been? He had to have the challenges to show that he was Hercules. And as awful as it is and everybody dying, like Zelensky would have never known, we would have never known what he and the Ukrainian people were capable of if not put in this. I mean, you remember the first week, everybody's like, okay, this is going to be done in a few days. Russia's obviously going to run it over. And they didn't. And they haven't yet.
Yeah, I remember that first night where, or maybe it was 2 or 3 days in, where he went on television and he's like, I probably won't be alive in the morning. So here's what I have to say. And I mean, it was like the world stopped to watch that. It was such a moment. So that's a really interesting comparison, because I don't think, I hope most of us don't have the kind of enemy like Vladimir Putin, right? We don't have that foil, but in every hero's journey, there's always the foil. There's always the something. Like if you don't have the rise unless you have the fall, right? Like it's just not that. Like a story that goes from 0 to 10 is not that interesting unless you have to like hit -3 along the way, right? Like that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
So do you, growing up as a competitive athlete, do you think that there was some shaping of that in you, because you always had a built-in enemy? You always had the other team?
Yeah, I mean, with swimming, I think it's even a little more helpful because you had the clock. So you
Yes.
didn't necessarily need someone else to be the enemy. There was always a clock. That's what you're always fighting against, because you could win a race and it could be terrible because the competition wasn't at the same level.
Right.
And so I think that helped. That being said, in college, I got injured and went from being pretty good to not nearly at the same level. And that took an entire reframing, right? Because to that point, so much of my identity, I was a swimmer and I was this elite swimmer. And if I wasn't that, then who was I? Right. And having to rethink, wait, then I became a student, right? And then really focus on academics and go to law school and everything. But it was a long journey to just at some point get to, wait, no, actually I'm Andrew. I don't have to be one of these labels. I can be this person that's not a single label or a label at all. Yeah.
Yeah, that I think, I mean, I think that might have also been part of why I stopped sleeping in the beginning of the pandemic, because, I was an author who spoke on stages and I got, standing ovations, and that's how I measured my worth. And, like you said, like I didn't have to be the best speaker there. I just had to be better than, what they were expecting. I'm it's so it's sort of like I only had myself as competition, right? Like I had to be better than the last time. Like I knew that there was a money line that I had to deliver better than the last time I delivered that line, and if I nailed that line, it was better. And so I was constantly competing against myself. I've always been the kind of person who is intrinsically motivated, but then all of a sudden there were no planes to events to stages because those didn't exist in COVID. And suddenly I was in this like, well, who am I now? And I realized that I was more externally motivated than intrinsically motivated than I thought. And that was difficult. And I had to figure out the who is Laura, right? The who is Andrew question. Who are you going to be in this moment in time? And so being able to lean on wisdom of the Stoics, I think would have been really helpful. me in that moment.
Well, I mean, and you said in this moment in time, and I think that's a really important piece, right? Because you don't have to define for all time, right? If we have such a high bar, it's paralyzing. Like,
Yes.
how do you ever live up to that? But if you can give yourself the grace of flexibility, you have way more that you can experience and pursue, right? Life is long, but life is short. And so you don't want to put it all forever, but you don't have to commit forever either. You can kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really deep thing. I want to talk about that a little bit. So this idea of giving yourself grace, that is tricky, right? That's really tricky to be able to say, like, it's gonna be okay. I don't have to be perfect today, right? But I can spend some time. So you talk a little bit about avoiding the perfection trap, and I mentioned Jonathan Fields earlier in the conversation. You know, Jonathan. Became an artist when he was younger. I think he tells a story, and I wrote about this in the book that I have coming out, about finding his grandfather's set of paints in the basement when he was like 17 years old, and he started painting, and he was good enough at it that people wanted him to paint stuff for him. I think he was like painting album covers on jean jackets or something. But when the painting on the jean jacket didn't match the image in his mind, it was really difficult, and he would destroy the whole thing and start over again. And that the space in between what we expect and what is reality, like what we're able to produce, is often where the pain happens, right? Our inability to like create the perfect thing. And I think being able to give ourselves grace, like he says now, after 4 decades of medication, maybe medication, but meditation, 4 decades of meditation, that he now can say, isn't it cool that I'm not good enough at this thing, but I get to spend the rest of my life getting better?
Right. I think Adam Grant this week may have had a tweet or post on exactly this thing of the kind of complacency of, oh, I'm not good, or saying, hey, now I have this opportunity. I'm not that good yet, and I have
Yes.
the opportunity to get better at this thing. And that's this fine line that I think some people could hear a lot of the principles in Stoicism and think, oh, wait, this is a recipe for complacency, for mediocrity, for just giving up and not caring. But it's kind of the opposite. It's saying, hey, what do I control or not? Right. So if you think about, say, a tennis match, Nadal doesn't control if he wins. He controls his diet before, his workout regimen, how focused he is in the moment. But if Djokovic is better on the day, Djokovic is better on the day. Right. So there are things he can influence. He can influence the outcome of the match by training as well as possible. But if his entire self-worth is on the result, that's a recipe for misery, because you can't always control the outcome. You can't control the results. And so you talk about Jonathan's mindset on perfect, right? The goal isn't this noun of perfect, it's this verb of perfecting, right? Like, how am I working on my craft, on this thing that I care about, with the mindset that this is this amazing opportunity. I get to continue to get better at this thing I really enjoy doing. That is a gift if you look at it the right way, right? Which is where the mindset comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about the founding fathers of our country and them writing, in order to form a more perfect union. And I'm like, that's a really good phrase, in order to form a more perfect union. They're not saying like we made a perfect union. It's like to continue to form one that gets more and more perfect, right? Like it's and I thought about this a lot this year with July 4th, and I'm like, it feels like we're losing rights, and why am I celebrating independence? But that thought that, like, just like our nation, right? Like we are never fully formed. And this idea that, like, once you achieve success, you're done. Like, it's finite. Like, I did it. I got the promotion. I got the raise. I got the job. I got the fancy house, the great spouse, so whatever the thing is that we're using to define as quote unquote success, is like this finite, I've made it. And yet every time we have some kind of success, we peek through those doors and we're like, well, I didn't even realize this was possible, right? And this is what, I sort of started this podcast as a way to talk to people about their own stories of wonder hell, this moment, this thing that I'm writing about in my next book. As you have the success and you're like, that's amazing, it's exciting, it's humbling, it's wonderful. But also, I had no idea that all of this was possible too. It's exhausting. It's anxiety provoking. It's stressful. It's kind of hell. It's wonderful and it's hell. It's kind of wonder hell. And so you have this moment where you're like, oh my God, the work I did opened more doors than I ever thought possible. And then as you peek through those doors, you're like, but wait, there's more doors there. Do I want to go through them? Can I go through them? Am I allowed to go through them? Will going through them kill me? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So, this idea of perfection is like a final destination, but there's always, it's like an asymptotic curve, right? Like you're just always going to get closer and closer, but you never quite get there.
Yeah. It was Jay-Z had this story of, he's Jay-Z, right?
Right.
And he goes to the Four Seasons when he was going to buy into the Brooklyn Nets to meet Prokhorov, the Russian billionaire who owned it. And he was like, man, I've been to the Four Seasons a lot and I'm Jay-Z. I think I get the best room, but there's this whole other level, right? Like when I'm hanging out with billionaires with big B's, like it's a totally different level. It just never ends. You pull up with your yacht with a helipad and then the one with 2 helipads pulls out.
Right.
It's this constant race. And so to me, it's pulling yourself away from that fallacy that when I achieve X, everything's solved. Like, let's get away from that. But then let's also appreciate what is it about this that I'm going after? It's not the line, right? Is it something, if you can enjoy the process, it's this that I really enjoy, right? Is it Jonathan creating the art? It's me sitting there, like, say he created the perfect thing. Is he going to go spend 8 hours a day looking at it after? No, like the fun part was painting and working on that. And so pulling it back to what it is you're trying to get out of it in the first place. Is it personal growth? Is it perfecting your craft? Whatever it is. And maybe, and more than likely, the titles, accolades will come along the way, but they can't be the destination. The result that you need to focus on is the process itself.
Yeah. And, and so that process, like you talk about, like you can control the controllables, right? So like Nadal controlling his diet and mobility and running drills. I've always thought it's interesting that, you look at professional athletes, for example, and they don't just, they don't work on the thing that they got wrong. They work on all the stuff they got right also, right? Because they're like grooving the pattern of the things that work. And I think that we, especially in the business world, we'll go and we'll do like a big pitch and we'll get 90% of it right, but we'll kind of screw up a little bit, 5% on the edges, the 10%. And then we go back and we just we just bang our head against the wall. We punish ourselves about the 10% and we work on the 10% over and over and over. And then we go and do another pitch. And on that other pitch, we get 90% right, but we get 5% on the edges wrong, but it's a different 10%, right? Because we don't spend time working on the stuff we did well. And what happens is I think sometimes we get lucky on the 90% we get right because we're not really spending time focusing on the process in that way. So, let's talk a little bit about founding your company and what you had to do to sort of get ready for that, for pitching it, for bringing in investors, for growing it. Were you deeply steeped in this mindset at the time, or is this something that you sort of had to learn and grow into?
100%. This was a few years in to found my first company. So I had the idea for my first company January 2012, and that was VacationFutures. That was this marketplace matching vacation homeowners to professional managers. And I took 10 months of kind of working nights and weekends trying to validate the idea, back maybe to some of that insecurity, but also to preparing ahead of time, right? Preparation is helpful to say, is this real enough to quit the secure job and go put my life into it? And the answer, I think, turned out to be wrong for that idea. But in general, I thought it was right. And so I quit my job in November and started VacationFutures, which then led to Rented Capital, which then led to Rented.com and what we're doing now. But it was, I think you referenced when we started, right, that I thought running away from a job where I had these clients that were super demanding, you need to fly to London tomorrow, you need to fly to New York tonight, that, hey, I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to be my own boss. And then getting in it, and I have investors emailing and employees calling and clients upset and feeling way more under the gun then. and then realizing, wait, it's not them, it's me, right?
Yeah.
They're going to do what they do. How am I going to react? How am I going to respond to it? And so that was something I had to learn and continue to learn, right? Like I'm not Buddha, as my wife likes to remind me.
Yeah. Well, I love, there's a line in your book where you're like, I thought it was, and I'm paraphrasing, but you're like, I thought it was all going to be perfect when I was no longer working for one person. And then I started my own company. I realized I was working for all the people. It's just like, oh no, what did I do?
Yeah.
So you talk about being a half a decade into your entrepreneurial journey, and your daughter is talking to you, and you're so stressed out about everything going on that you didn't even realize was happening. And she finally like screamed at you like, "Daddy!" Right? Which like woke you up, and you're like, "Oh, wait a minute!" Right? Like I am spending all of my time, even if I'm not literally at work, I'm still at work, right? Like my brain is here. So you were in a place where you were exhausted, you were distracted, you had anxiety all the time. So how did like imagine somebody listening to this is you're in those shoes, you're in that moment. Like, where do you start to pull yourself out of the negative spiral that you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, especially in that instance, and this is personal to me, but I think a lot of people have the same. When I'm sleep deprived, the world is literally grayer, right?
No, I mean, they don't let prisoners of war sleep. Like, it is literally a form of torture to be sleep deprived.
But I mean, even visually, like when I see blue is more muted, red is more muted, like my perception of the world is literally grayer when I'm sleep deprived. And that was an instance where I was sleep deprived. I couldn't turn my brain off this one thing. So I wasn't sleeping at night. And then even when I was in the day, I wasn't going anywhere. And so my rule now is when I start to feel that way, hey, don't think about big topics when you're feeling like this. Don't make big decisions when you're sleep deprived. Like maybe you'll come out the same way in 2 or 3 days, but maybe not. And now having been through 40 something years of this, you don't make good decisions when you're sleep deprived. You don't have good thoughts when you're sleep deprived. So don't put your mind in that place until you get some rest and then think about the thing. So in that specific instance, for me, it's making sure just put everything to the side until I can get sleep. I mean, it depends what you're doing, right? Like I have people in the book who are Navy SEALs. There are probably instances that you can't wait for a good night.
They can't wait 2 to 3 days. Yeah.
You really have to.
They can't wait 2 to 3 minutes.
Then, and that's a preparation. Most of us aren't in those kinds of situations, right? Like I worked in Afghanistan and there were firefights. Now I work in vacation rentals, and I tell my team when they're stressing out about stuff, I'm like, look, this is important and we'll deal with it, but we're all getting home safely tonight. So let's put it a little bit into context and just lower the temperature about what's happening. So that's sleep to me is a very big place to start. If you already have the sleep, the other piece, kind of the two pieces I would say is one, go back to grace of, hey, this movie that you can't turn off in your head is totally normal. Not only normal, but it's how your brain evolved. It's how you were born. This is what is going to happen. And so don't say, oh, I'm so stupid, or why can't I do this? Like, Siddhartha figured it out. But yeah, that's why we still talk about Buddha. But it's very hard for the rest of us. The rest of us have not figured it out. And then once you kind of give yourself that grace, then it gets back to where we started all of this, which is that noticing. And just notice, wow, okay, where's that thought coming from? Let me dig on it. It's back to the Stoics, right? We think about stony face, not feeling. And it's the exact opposite. Feel it, notice it. Right? When my daughter has a meltdown and starts crying about something, like pull over to the side of the road and let's sit. Where does it feel? Oh, it's in my stomach. Okay, well, let's dig through it. And it's not, hey, stop crying. It's what's driving this.
Yeah. It's funny. One of the greatest pieces of parenting advice I ever got was don't solve your kids' problems. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, they've got problems. I can solve them. The answer is so obvious. And they're like, no, they don't want you to solve them. They just want company and their sadness. And I was like, wait, what? I just let them be sad. And it's kind of amazing. I think we do this to ourselves. When my kids were little, they would have a problem and I'd be like, oh, well, let's just fix it. And they would immediately argue with me. And I was like, well, do you know what, like, don't you want a solution? Why are you clinging to the pain? And somebody said, don't solve the problem, just recognize the pain. And so I would say, God, oh, your ice cream cone fell on the floor. Like, instead of let's get another one. Well, I don't want another one. I wanted this one. Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really sad. That must really hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hurts a lot. Well, what would you want? What do you think would make you feel better? I want another ice cream cone. Okay, well, let's go get one. It's like they solve the problem. They know what the solution is, but sometimes they just need to be to you say you like recognize the emotion, but I think sometimes they need to have like to be seen. Like they want you to recognize the emotion. And I think we don't do that to ourselves. Like we don't treat ourselves like those hurt little children. And maybe if we did that, that would feel better.
I'm glad you got there, because it's not just kids, right? It's have you read the book Burnout by the Nagoski sisters?
No.
Because they talk about kind of the stress cycle. And so when, say, we're getting chased by a lion, right? Your heart rate gets up, you go stress, and you either escape it, and so you have this come down, and you have this cycle you run through. But now those stressors that we have, we just try to move on. And what was happening in the story, we were saying, hey, what are you feeling? They get to go through all the stages so they can close it out and get their mind elsewhere. And so often we don't go through the full cycle. We just kind of bottle pieces of it up as we go, and then eventually we break. And so it is recognizing the holistic need of us.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to me in the beginning of the pandemic. Like all of the, I'm just going to keep muscling my way through the stress and the anxiety and all the rest. Like it just caught up with me, right? Like that book, The Body Keeps the Score. Like I think it does. It catches up to us, and then suddenly we don't have the capacity to just sleep and to rest and to recharge. And I think we make fun of the millennials a lot for, they want to have like relaxation time and recharging, and they need some self-care and all this, but I think they're onto something, right? I mean, I think that that our generation, I think I'm probably at the top end of it. You're probably at the bottom end of it. I think are you still Gen X or are you millennial? You are a millennial.
Millennial. I'm 81, so I think I swing both ways.
Yeah. So I think there is this like the sort of the consumerism and the greed and all of like the 80s that I think is sort of inside of a number of us, that we feel like we have to keep sort of pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing.
Yeah.
And then like the generation that you're at the top of, I think very much is more self-focused in a way that I think will be better long term. But I do think it is that sort of recognizing those feelings and sort of understanding what's there. So you talk a little bit about being present in the book, right? And I think it's sort of being present for, what's happening today and feeling the emotions and feeling what's around you. But there is this sort of being present with yourself, right? And I think that is such a Stoic philosophy, is that sort of recognizing those emotions and understanding how you react to everything that's coming at you. Because I think we feel like we have to react to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's sort of like you have to get to inbox zero, right? It's like, well, do you? Like, unless your job is having an empty inbox, like what is getting to inbox zero actually doing for you? It's busy, but it's not impact.
It's a metric, but does it matter? Right.
Exactly.
But does it matter?
Exactly. And so do you think we're surrounded by all of these metrics that don't matter? We're like continuing to sort of busy ourselves without stopping and saying like, how am I feeling? Do I really want this? I mean, you start the book with a great story about some entrepreneurs who are going to get funding, and the VC guy's like, well, do you really want funding? Right. Like, why do you really want funding?
Yeah, rolling back to where you started it on millennials and how they're better on the self-care, et cetera, versus the 80 materialistic society. And one, I think if you survey millennials and then ask the things that they care about, one, they're literally just human answers. Like anybody would also want those things. That I want more restful time. I want fewer hours of work. Like these are natural human tendencies that we would want.
Right. But they haven't been raised to think that those are shameful.
Yes. And
I mean, they're being told that they're shameful by my generation, who was raised to think they were shameful, but they were raised thinking that they were okay things to ask for.
Well, but I think the other piece is they're also having to face things way more difficult than we did.
Yes.
So the 80s, we had MTV, and then we got Real World. And so you saw some of that, but they're living not just with keeping up with the Kardashians, but everything in social media constantly getting into your head. Like,
well, yeah. And I mean, like my oldest son is 20, and he said to me a couple of weeks ago, he's like, so did you just grow up with just like constant existential, stress? And I was like, yeah, like we had drills. We'd have to climb under the table. We were afraid that the USSR was going to bomb us. And he's like, well, yeah, we have that too.
Except
I was like, oh my God.
Except it's in our pocket 24/7, right?
Yes.
So,
and they've got that and crisis and, the climate crisis and democracy falling apart and, shooting, active shooter drills, I mean, like he was like, we have that too, because we have that and everything else. And as you said, we can't get away from it.
And when you look at depression rates, suicide rates, they're going in the wrong direction.
Yes.
So it's almost, they're having to react so much more strongly than any other generation did.
Yeah.
Because the world's gotten so far away from the natural rhythm and cadence of human and gone, a computer is going to be way faster and we can't keep up with it. And that's exhausting. And that's what they're coming up in. So they're coming up with their own solutions, which are, hey, I'm going to say, I don't care about this as much. I'm going to try to get this me time, because they're having to fight against something we just didn't have to grow up fighting against.
Right. I mean, we could literally like get in the car and drive home from school completely disconnected. Like we had the radio, right? And like the DJ would talk about like whatever the hot gossip was between Eddie Van Halen and Valerie Bertinelli, but like that was it. Like we were away. We were disconnected. Like there was a time to be, and we don't have that now.
It's like 07, 08 was the iPhone, right? It wasn't that long ago. Even in 2000, 2001 with the internet, there was not the expectation you were replying to an email within an hour or even 24 hours. It could be weeks, and that was totally fine, right? The cadence was so different. My grandfather worked till he was 80, but his tempo, his pace was so different when you're mailing physical letters than when you constantly have your smartphone in front of you and feel like I can't ever take a vacation. I mean, it's just a totally different problem.
Yeah, so there's an interesting question. How long into your career do you think you did the same amount of work that your grandfather did in his entire career? Right? Like, do you think you hit that number like by the time you were 27? Like, like the number of hours working?
Yeah, probably on the hours, but this is back to that question on the metrics versus what matters.
Right.
If I look at the output, what he created, what he sold, I'm not sure I was all that much more productive. And if we look at the statistics, no, we're not all that much more productive. We are putting a ton more time in. We are putting way more mind share in 24/7. But if you're looking at the output per person, it hasn't actually changed that much.
So how do we do this? I remember when I ran my company, I walked into a client's office and I gave a pitch and they were like, great, we're going to hire you. And I was like, awesome. I'll get you the proposal in an hour. And then I like walked out of the meeting and there were a billion emails and I was like, oh shit, how am I going to get them that proposal? Like I just totally overpromised and I killed myself to get it done. And then the next time I did a pitch and I got them, I was like, great, I'll get it to you by the end of the day. And they were like, great. And then I left and I opened up my phone and again, a million emails and I had to kill myself to get it done. And the, proposals had typos and there were like wrong numbers. And it was just, it wasn't my best work. Right. And it took me years to be able to be like, I'll get you the proposal by the end of the week. Terrific. Right. They've already decided they wanted us, but I was just as guilty of adding to the speed and the spin and the expectation. But I think, as an entrepreneur, we're so excited when somebody wants to hire us, and we're so we feel like we're only as good as our last sale, our last project, our last victory. So how do we as entrepreneurs slow the pace in a way? I mean, I know you and your family moved, you spend part of the time in your lives in Bermuda. That must help, right? But not all of us can do that. Although I I'd be lying if I said I didn't multiple times during the pandemic think I'm just going to show up on his front doorstep and just move in, because it looked great. But how do we slow things down without disappointing our clients, our families, our friends who expect us to be on the same pace as the rest of the world?
I mean, one is questioning that expectation in the
Yeah.
first place of, do they actually expect, like, how much will it change their life if you waited 48 hours
Yeah.
to respond to that email as opposed to 48 minutes?
That's a really good question. The very best piece of advice I ever got was, "You're just not that important." And I was like, "Wait, but I am." So we have to be so questioning the expectation. That's good. That's a very good start.
And the other piece, I was doing a workshop with a company and somebody was saying, well, hey, it's great to bucket your email checking time for these roles, but I'm a salesperson. My dad always said, like, he got the deal because he was first there, et cetera, et cetera. And say, okay, look, that is a solution that might not work for you because the person who's doing that is trying to get something else, right? So you need to decide, what is it you want. Don't go implement something saying, hey, this is going to fix, if you don't know what's the outcome you're actually trying to achieve. If the goal is, I want to get as many sales as possible, then go through the analysis of what activities actually lead to higher sales. Is it the faster I send a proposal? Does that have any bearing on the higher sales? Is it how many emails I send a day? Does that have any bearing? Like, what are the activities? And let me put more time there and less time in these other things. It was, I referenced Tim Ferriss' podcast already, but he, at the end of the year, said, instead of New Year's resolutions, he started this new practice. And I did. It was absolutely amazing, where he takes his calendar and looks day by day and week by week from the year prior. So instead of making resolutions, here's who I'm going to be, what I'm going to do next year. He looks through that and says, what were the most energizing things that I did? And what were the most draining things?
Mm-hmm.
And as I look forward to this year, how do I proactively create opportunities for more of those energizing things and remind myself to say no on those draining things? But if we don't know what we're trying to get or where we're trying to go, it's unlikely we're going to get there. So in all of those, and slow down, I'm not sure slow down is the answer for everyone. It's saying, where are you actually trying to get? What actually matters?
Yeah, I love that, because I feel like the like, just relax, learn to meditate, take some me time. Like, that's, I love to say yes to things. Everyone's like, learn how to say no, right? Like, I, I don't think just saying no blanket to like everything that comes your way works, because I firmly believe that there's an adventure around every corner if you just look hard enough. Like, it's exciting. Like, I want to say yes. I want to be overcommitted. I want to have loads of things coming at me. I think that's how you make your own luck, right? Like, you put yourself in the deal flow, you're in there. But yeah, I think this question of like, is this a metric that actually matters, is a really good point, because I could look at my calendar and I could say, I'm super busy, I'm not really impactful. There are certain things that I do. Like, when my company was first starting to scale, I sat down with a business coach, and I was so proud of myself. I brought him like our marketing plans and our P&L and my, strategic plan, and like this 80 billion, point list of like all the to-dos that I had. And he like looked down the to-do list and he circled two things and he pushed it back to me and goes, that's all you need to do. Like, and you don't do these two things, none of the other 78 things matter. And if
Right.
you don't do, and nobody else can do these two things, that's your entire job. The rest of this is just noise. The rest of this is just for your own ego, right? So like, what actually matters? What's actually going to bring that? So I love this idea of spending time thinking about what's really going to move the ball forward.
Yeah. I mean, do less, but do it better.
Yes.
You can't just blanket do less. Hey, I'm going to cut everything that I do by 80%. That's probably not going to get you to where you want to go. But first, you need to know, where do I want to go? And then what is it that actually helps me get there versus keeps my hands busy?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then put the time there. Do less, but do really well on those two things that are going to make the difference.
Yes. Yes. I had my husband's boss is a founder. She is the founder of a hedge fund. She's a woman. It is the largest hedge fund in the world run by a woman. And she has, she's worth a bajillion dollars, and she's got a happy marriage and healthy kids, and is just like a normal human, like you would not think, right? Like she could get the wing at the Four Seasons, right? But she's just, and I sat down with her one day and I'm like, just tell me, like, how did you do this? Like, how were you able to raise these incredible healthy children? And she said, your only job is to raise emotionally healthy kids. Like, you have resources, you have privilege, you have leverage, you're raising two Caucasian males in, a fancy zip code. Your only job is to get them from here to there emotionally intact. I was like, oh, okay, that's it. And so I think a lot about that. Like, we think that our responsibilities are huge. Like, I have to get them all of these incredible things. I have to have the perfect internship and the perfect job and get into the perfect school and have the perfect everything. But really, my job is really small, right? It's just emotionally intact. That's it. And I thought, when I sat down, I said, it's probably the same thing with my business, and it's the same thing with myself, and it's the same with everything that I do. We blow up our responsibilities into this huge thing. Like, we have to be everything to all people all the time. And really, in order to get where we want to be, it's not that big. Like, the things we have to do are not that big. Like, your job as CEO of your company is probably not selling every single possible owner of a second home to rent it out and let you manage it. It's probably to make sure that you are tightly managing the culture of your company, right? Like, it's probably a very small and a very different job than the one that we think it is when we are in the trenches in the beginning, being all things to all people as those, baby entrepreneurs.
Right. When you're a company of one, you are having to pick up all the pieces.
Right.
And then back to the kind of the privileged side of going through the exercise of, hey, what do I love doing? What do I hate doing? What am I great at? What am I terrible at? And how do I spend as much of my life as possible in that top right box? What can we just stop doing? What doesn't matter? What can I outsource or hire somebody to do? What am I might enjoy it, but I'm not very good at it. And this other person's better. Maybe I can learn from them and get better, but let them do that thing. And let me spend my life in this top right.
Yeah. And also, what do I suck at? And I don't actually want to get better at. Like, it was a major moment for me when I realized, as the CEO of my company, that I was a terrible manager. I am an amazing leader. I can shine the light on people and make them feel like $1 million, but help them day to day to continuously get better at the quality of their work. No, I am awful. And not only was I awful, I didn't want to get better at it. My team didn't want me to get better. They didn't want me involved in it at all. And there was that moment where I was like, I can't be the leader and the manager.
Yeah.
So I had to pick one.
Right. That bottom left, like, I don't enjoy it and I'm not good at it. Why would I'm an
And
adult.
there are people who are so much better at it, who are literally like went to school to learn how to do it.
I'm doing a disservice to the company in spending time down here.
Absolutely. And once I figured that out, it was like, oh, okay, now it's like, put the right people in the right place. So when you do these workshops with companies, do you sit down with them as a team? Do you sit down with the leaders individually? How does it work?
Yeah. So first I work with, it's either the head of people or HR, kind of whoever's running it. Some have actually, like Delta has an entire mental health group working with them. And then crafting from the different exercises, which ones do we want to focus on this workshop that already align with the foundation you're building? Because a lot of companies, they have other points they're trying to hit on. Maybe it's gratitude, maybe it's on time management, right? And tailoring which exercises we focus on to that. And so then the workshops themselves are introduced to this concept of mind ownership versus mind rentership, why it's the natural state to be a mind renter. There's not just this point in time in history, not just you, we're all dealing with it. And then, hey, here are a couple specific manifestations, whether it's renting from someone else, it's renting from this event or circumstance you don't control, it's renting from some imagined version of yourself. And here's how, some illustrations, and here's how we actually work through it. And so we'll pull out the worksheets and we'll do it real time together as a group.
And these are the worksheets that are at the end of each chapter, or there's more?
Correct. It's the same one. There is a downloadable workbook. So if you buy the book, then you can get or audio or Kindle, whatever, on my website, there's a downloadable PDF that pulls all the exercises out with the takeaways so that you have a separate kind of go-to guide.
So tell me where we can find you then. All of these workshops, all of these are at your website?
Yes. I mean, you can contact through the website, mandrewmcconnell.com, for any kind of speaking or workshops. I'm on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with anybody there. It's /MAndrewMcConnell, Twitter, MA McConnell, Instagram, MAndrewMcConnell. It's all kind of,
it's all sort of there. But if people go to mandrewmcconnell.com, they can find links to all of these things.
yes.
Thank you for joining me today. This was really terrific and such a great reminder of great habits that I think I've let drop through the pandemic. And I think a lot of us have. The book is called Get Out of My Head, Creating Modern Clarity with Stoic Wisdom. Andrew McConnell, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.